Welcome back to Tried and Tested. So in this episode, I want to talk about components. So I'm really excited about components. It has been released to production as an experimental feature 3 weeks ago. And I think it's one of those features that all Powerappers would love. Like if you make apps, you would definitely use this feature. So in this episode, I'm gonna talk about a couple of things. I first start with a brief introduction on what is components and why I think everyone would love it. Then I'll show what you can do with components, which is create a simple component, how to add it to the form, and lastly I'll talk about how you can reuse them, which is the import and export feature. So let's start with the first one, which is the brief introduction of components. So what is components, right? And why I think it's brilliant idea to have this feature in Powerappps. Firstly, in my own analogy, I feel that components is something like your PowerPoint master templates. For those of you who are familiar with Office, it's like your PowerPoint master templates. You build something and then you can reuse them. The only difference is with this is you can export it out and you can reuse them in other apps as well. So if you are a .NET developer, you probably look at components something like your class and procedure, something that you have built, you have written, and then you can reuse them throughout your program. Again, the difference is that this one you could actually export it and re-import to different apps. So I'm not very sure whether you can export class and procedure. I don't quite remember. The last time I wrote something was 10-12 years ago and it might have changed. Okay, so that's how I compare components to. So what I think is great, it saves back a lot of time. Like if you have an idea to build a certain feature, like maybe a swipe, or maybe a form with a specific theme, and you can actually reuse it the next time you build another app and you don't need to build it again. So that to me saves back a lot of time, especially more complicated ones where that involves timer and stuff, and always takes me time to build it and test it. So now I don't need to do that. I just need to do it once. One of the use case that I can think of is if you build an app for an organization. Like if you build an app for your company, and you're probably gonna build like 5-10 apps, not just one, right? And you want to have the same theme every time, like how the form layout, colors, so you can build the themes, create it as a component, and then just reuse them. Or maybe like buttons, right? You have the buttons of the same shapes and sizes, but you just want to change the text of the button. Like maybe this is a save button, that is a back button, or open button, but you want it to look the same. So you can just build how the button looks and feel, and then create the text as a property, and you can input in different text the next time you build them. Same goes for colors, images, drop down lists. You can have a drop down list as a component, and when you build the app, you just put in the value of the drop down list, like maybe a list of occupations or a list of fruits and etc., but using the same sort of container. Okay, so I hope I explained it clearly. If you have more questions, just put it down there on the comments. I'll respond, or you can go to the Powerappps community page. I'll put the link below. Brian Dang have a pretty good explanation, a very clear one, on the terminologies of the component and how to use them. So now let's move on to the next thing that I want to talk about, which is building a component. Okay, so this is the fun part here to me. So like every other experimental feature, when you create a new app, you don't see the feature until you have turned it on. So first you go to app settings, and then advanced settings. When you scroll all the way down, there's a section called experimental feature. So go further down, you see these are all the new experimental feature that you can turn on to try out. This is the components. So you have to turn this on, or else you don't see the functions on the form or your app. So now when I go back, here I go to, so you look at now my screen here, I have a new tab that's called components. This is where you can add components. And then if you go to the screen, if you go and insert, you'll be able to insert new components, which brings you back to the component screen, or you can even add existing components that you have created, import and export the component. So these are the two new buttons that will appear on your toolbar when you turn it on. If not, then you don't see them. Okay, so next thing you do is to create the component. So I have done a few examples here that I've created, like a drop down list, a slider. This is something that I built with SVG. I've been playing around with SVG a lot thanks to my friend Natraj. He introduced me to it, and yeah, it's really amazing things that you can do. So when I was playing around with it, I thought, can I make a component from it and pass in properties? And yes, I could. So I created a property called linear gradient, and then whenever I pass the colors, it will change the color of the gradient color of my object here. So I can show that later at the end. And so now I'll just create one component here. So new component. So when you create a new component, you have a blank form here. This form, the size, you can change it. I like to change it to the size of my actual component, which means if I create a button, I like to change this to the size of button, because or else when you add that into the screen, it will have like a lot of, I just don't like how it looks. It's just not very clean. Although it's like a blank space, extra space with your button on it, like a whole template. You can still add controls on top of it, but I just doesn't like it. I just like it to be more cleaner. So I'll create a simple one, maybe a button where you can change the text and the color. Okay. So first let's put in the buttons. So I want the button to be a bit rounded. Let's put radius to 30. Okay, it's my button. Rename my component. Let's just call it com underscore button. Sorry, I'll just do that. And I'll rename this to just button 1. Okay. So now if I click on a component, you see that you have the component size, which is this white template here. You can change the size. You can also change the fill of color of the template. If you probably create something else like a form that you want to reuse, you can change these ones. Or else here at the bottom you have the custom property. So on a custom property, you can select input and output. So input is values that you're going to pass in that will change the characteristics of the button, like colors, text. It could be maybe the values inside a drop-down list or the values in a list. Output is the output you get upon an action taken on this component here. For instance, if it's a drop-down list, the output, you can have the output based on what is selected, or maybe you can even have an image based on what is selected. So that requires a bit more configuration, yeah, but you can actually do that. So then you have the data type. Whether you select input output, you have a specific data type. So this depends on what is input or output value that you want to pass. Like for color, I'll choose color. Then there's currency. Maybe for drop down lists and lists, you use a table because it's a list of data. Date and time, screen, a screen that you want to configure and reuse, numbers, boolean, and etc. So depend on your use case and depends on what you want to do. So for my button here, I will have two types of input. First will be the color. So let me just click on custom property. The display name, this will be my property name. Property display name, sorry. So I'll have but color. My property name, I'll put a similar thing, but color. Description, I'll leave it and put it the button color, so know what is it about. And because it's color, I just gonna select color. Correct. So now you have a property called but color. Okay, and so what you're gonna do now, is you're gonna go to the button, and on the field of the button, you're gonna change this to the property. So it'll be com underscore but dot but color. So later on on your screen, you can actually define the button color and this will change. So next I will do is maybe have the text. So I go to properties, this but text. Okay. Then same thing, but text, so it's like the same name, and then it's the button text. Again, this input. So text replace, correct. So now you go to the button, and this is the text I want to change, right? So I'll go to text, and I'll change this to the property, which is the combat dot but text. Okay, so this, now I like it to be the same size as my button, which is I'll just show you. If I'll make this a bit smaller, I'll show you how it looks. So it's 400, so I'll put here 300, oops, 300 and 300. Yes, so just need to move this a bit. Okay, so when I go back to my screen, I could add this component onto the screen. I'll just create a new screen, maybe. Yep, blank one. And then on insert component, I can insert combat, which is my button component. So you see, if I have some space here, I actually have this white space all around. And if I put some fill, yep, it does cover it, but then yeah, it's just me. I don't like it. I like it to be like minimized, the same size as the component. So this is actually the template of this component here. But anyway, that's not the point. So the point is, now I could actually change the color. So if I now click on this component and I go to the custom property, I could change this probably to purple, and I could change the text to Powerappps. Save Powerappps example. So you can do a lot of things. You can even probably configure the size, the font, though I've not tried the font, but I reckon you could, probably as a text, and then you enter the text manually. So this is how simple you can create a component. Okay, I'll show you an example of a component that is using output. So one that I've created here, this is the drop down list. So this one, if you look at this here, you have the input and output property. So the input property would be the list. Let me just change this so that is so this is the, well, I've created it as a table because for drop down list and for list it's a table, so you can either put in a string, a field, number, or boolean true and false, and the output property will be what you have selected. So for the output property, you will need to go to at once, and the output you have to put it as the drop down list selected value. So that is the output. So what happens is when you go to the screen, because selected value because of the value is selected, okay, so what happens is when you go to the screen, if I insert this drop down, okay, so here on the items, if I'm not wrong, it would be called string. This will be how syntax works. String apple. Yeah, correct. Okay, comma, string range. Alright, so now if I run this, I should have apple and orange, and then I'll add a label. So this label would be the output of that component. So the label text would be com underscore dd underscore one dot selected one. So based on what's selected, this will change. Cool. So for now, what I read is components does not support collection, so you can't actually build a component with a collection, which actually kind of makes sense because well, components is like more of like a building block, right? It's not a database. I also tried adding a collection, like pointing this to a collection, and I can't get it to work. I'll update you if I get it to work. I'll just research around a little bit more. But for now, I'm just manually creating the drop down list value. So if anyone have tried that, let me know. I need to do more research on that one. Okay, so I'll just show you some of the other components that I've built. Let's go to something interesting like the SVG one. Well, I really like that because I think SVG is another one of the cool stuff that we have. Probably one day I'll just do a try and tester on it. So if you look at the SVG component, if I go to the properties, I have the linear gradient. So this linear gradient, I created it as text because then I could put in like blue, so it works as well. Yep, so you change to blue, I make it green, change to green. There are more things that you can do. This is just a very simple one that I've created. You can probably have changing of size, adding of text. So you just have to manipulate the SVG formula or code that you have in there, and make sure that the parameter that you pass in is the properties that you have set. So good, that's how you use components. Now next thing I want to talk about is how you can actually reuse them. So it's really cool that we have the import and export feature. So that you have to, if you come here, okay, you can actually import and export. If you click on the new component, there's a three dot here, you can import and export. So when you import and export, you actually import or export the whole chunk of components that you have, save it in the solution file, and then you can import back into another app. So you can't select, like I tried, but I can't select the component that I want to export or import. I have to just export, import everything, but that's all good because then I could either reuse everything or just reuse what I need. So I'll just quickly show you how to do it. So I just click export. Yeah, so maybe I just put it on my desk. Just create a new folder for this maybe. It's called components. And then I'll just rename this to maybe tried and tested component. Save it. And then I come here, create an app, create a canvas app. I'll do the same thing. I'll turn on components and I'll import it in. So just create a phone layout. Skip this. Come here, same thing, go to app settings, turn it on, because if you don't, then you don't see them there. It's components, I've turned it on. Come back here, there I have components. Then here I'll just go import. Import the solution file. It's take a bit of time because I have bit over there, but then yep. So all the components are here, and you can actually still edit them if you need to. Like this one. You still change the property, and still change the code. So if you wanna still make modification to it, it's fine. And then go to screen, same thing. I could go to insert, I can insert any component I want. So it's that simple, and I think it's really brilliant. Like, it's one of the things that any app maker would want to have, because you could do all kinds of building blocks. You could define any properties that you want for these building blocks, and you just use your imagination. And I think a lot of times we spend a lot of time recreating components, especially things like more complicated ones, I say, like sliders or maybe swaps, or one example I gave was the UI one, where you can actually expand and collapse. You can expand and collapse a section. You can create that as a component as well, and you can just reuse them. So one of the things, probably just a tip, maybe not a tip, just common sense, but one of the things I like to do is I like to actually build the component on my screen, especially complicated ones, before I put it as a component, because you can't test when it's a component unless you insert it onto the screen. So either way, it's probably the same. You can just create a component and put it on the screen, but I don't like to do that. So I like to just go to the screen, screen 3 here. This is my example of the slider. So I like to make sure that it actually works. Let's say, just pull this back out. Yeah. So I built this with a timer and everything. So I don't like to just build it there and use my imagination, put it in a component, put it on the screen and then try it. So I built this whole thing on the screen with a timer. What it does is that this like the swap function, is it the slide function that you have on your iPhone. You might also have it on Android. I'm not very sure, I'm not an Android user, but you know how on the iPhone, when you have a contact, you want to delete the contact, you click the red color delete, and then you will actually swipe to the end and your contact got deleted. So it's a partial function you have there. So what will happen there is I swipe this halfway, after 2 seconds it will actually complete the whole swipe. So once I know that it works here, what I do is I just copy everything. I just copy this. I go to components, just Ctrl C, Ctrl V, and then I'll create a new component and I'll paste it. Yep. So I have everything here, and then I just need to make modifications to it. I'll probably make this invisible, turn this off, add the property I want. Like if I say I want to be able to change the color of the label, of the off label, then I'll just add a property, put a color, and so forth. So one example that I've done here is this one. I call it component slider. So I have a few properties, which is changing the text of off and on, changing the duration, how fast I can swipe, change the color. So this is how I like to do it. So once I know that it works, I just pop it into the component, and then of course I can still put back the screen to test, but I don't need to go back and forth again. So that's all I have today for components. I will still continue my research with probably maybe there's other things that I missed out or I found out, I will add on, probably do a video or just add on to a mini blog post. I'll see how that goes. But that's all for today, and I hope you guys enjoy it. Happy power wrapping. Bye.